Hello everyone. Now to begin and check everything is okay, can everybody write in the chat box? I can see people writing already. Can you make sure it's to all participants? And please let us know where you are listening in to us from. I can see already that there's India, Nigeria, Dubai, Tokyo. Fabulous. Please make sure to put to all participants and attendees if that is an option. It should be. Brazil, Colombia, India, Argentina, France, Mexico, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, Ecuador, Spain, Doha, Germany. Oh my God, there's so many. Honduras. Okay, I love this. Peru and everywhere, basically everywhere. Fantastic. So welcome to today's Virtual Skills Lab. This forum is an online global meeting space offering you the opportunity to skill up and get ahead from home. Connect with like-minded go-getters from all over the globe and hear from world-class Hult professors on the latest topics and trends in live interactive workshops and webinars. So for those of you who are joining a Hult event for the first time, I just want to give you a little bit of a background about us. Hult have designed a school that looks to the future by focusing on developing your leadership skills, challenging you with a future-oriented curriculum, and building a global perspective that only first-hand experience can bring. We currently offer an undergraduate program, 5 specialist one-year master's programs, a 1-year global MBA, and a uniquely flexible executive MBA. For more information on all our programs, please check out our website, www.hult.edu. Okay, so today we are joined by Hult Professor Amit Mukherjee and current MBA student Shirley Xu to discuss Professor Amit's new publication, Leading in the Digital World. This book was published by MIT Press in collaboration with Sloan Management Review as part of their highly selective series, Management on the Cutting Edge. Now, before we begin, I just want to give a little bit of housekeeping. A recording of the webinar will be sent to everybody after the event in the next couple of days. And if you want to ask a question, Shirley will be monitoring the Q&A box. And you will, if you see the Q&A box, usually it's at the top or at the bottom of your screen, please put your questions in there and Shirley will hopefully get to them. Okay, so I would love to now hand over to Shirley and Amit.
Hi there, good to see everyone joining us today. I'm Shirley. I'm a graduate from Hult, and I met Professor Amit, who's our guest speaker, when he taught me the course Leading Digital Transformation. And this was about in October. I remember the first class we have in my Disruptive Innovation dual degree, which Professor Amit was finalizing and finishing his book for publishing while he was teaching us too. So Professor Amit, this will be an interaction between you and I, and then we'll pass it to the audience for more Q&A. So Professor, you're obviously an expert in this field of area of leadership and being a trusted educator by the school to teach the business students, which are the leaders of tomorrow, regarding on leadership in the digital world and how to lead their organization to navigate in the digital environment. But I'm really curious, like what inspired you to further on write a book about leading digital transformation? Oh, Professor, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Basic rookie mistake, okay? Even after a month of teaching online, basic rookie mistake. Thank you, Shirley, and welcome to everybody. I noticed people from literally from around the world. I noticed a name from the Philippines, for example. So thank you for showing up at this time. It's middle of the night in some parts of the world. So I really appreciate it. So why did I write this book? What inspired me to write this book? So I do a lot of executive education. I do a lot of consulting at very senior levels in organizations. And over the last 5 years, what I was noticing, 5-6 years, what I was noticing that the types of questions and issues that senior executives were raising had changed. And it was changing subtly. Not everybody was asking the same thing, but how they were thinking about leadership was changing. And I said, that's really interesting. This was a topic that I had actually deliberately left out when I had written my last book in 2008, The Spider Strategy. I deliberately left out the issue of leadership. And here I could see the changes that were happening. And so they didn't say that we're changing leadership. They were all trying to solve a problem. And I started seeing a pattern. And I said, you know what? We keep talking about digital technologies changing the entire world. And we don't seem to be talking about how it's changing the very idea of leadership. And that was the genesis of the book. And just one more thought on that. On the one hand, if you talk to a senior executive, if you talk to many leadership experts, they will say leadership is timeless. It does not change. The basic ideas of leadership don't change. If you talk to senior executives, they don't let theory get into the way. If something has to change, they will make sure it changes. And we actually do know, and this is something that might surprise many, many, many of you. We do know that throughout history, in the last couple of 100 years anyway, organizations have changed dramatically. Leaders have changed dramatically. I do this with executives. I ask them, and you might remember this question, Shirley, from our class. I ask, how long have we had teams? How long have we had teams? And the typical answer is forever. In reality, outside Japan's, you remember that question, right? Shirley?
Yep.
Okay. So outside Japan, we have had teams for only since the late 80s in North America and the early 90s in Europe. Now, there have been isolated cases of teams, but the broad-based, working through teams, that's happened only relatively recently. The idea that a leader is supposed to look after his or her people, that's very, very recent. Again, came with the issue of teams. So we know these things change. And so we have the digital world. It would be absolutely arrogant to believe that our ideas of organizations and leaderships wouldn't change. That's what inspired me to write it. So
amazing. So writing a book is not easy, and of course, a lot of thought and your experiences and different theories go behind it. What kind of research backs your book? Basically, what kind of research did you have to writing these ideas in your book?
Thank you. That's a great question. This is not just a bunch of opinions expressed by one person. So let me tell you what we did. So the first thing I did was actually look at how the digital technologies were changing the world. Okay. And we all hear about disruption and disruption and disruption and disruption and disruption. What the heck does it actually mean? What do digital technologies actually do? So interestingly enough, nobody had actually written about that question. Nobody had published anything about the issue of what do digital technologies actually do. So I went looking in a place which is close to home, but very far from Silicon Valley and the mindset of Silicon Valley. In 2003, something amazing happened in the world that most people don't even remember. And what happened was we sequenced the human genome. And what came out of that sequencing of the human genome will affect every individual on this planet. So drug discovery changed profoundly. And we couldn't sequence the human genome without digital technologies. And the moment we sequenced the human genome, drug discovery changed profoundly. So I looked at this emerging industry, which doesn't fit the conventional ideas of disruption, to truly understand what digital technologies were doing. And then I started looking at other industries to see where you saw similar patterns. Now, with that base in mind, I was talking to literally hundreds of mid-tier executives and senior executives, and I was picking up the vibes, which inspired me to write the book. And then I did two more things. Most books on leadership that you see, sadly, are focused on how Americans should lead and how Britishers tend to lead, and maybe a few Australians. That's a very small part of the world. And by the way, it's not all Americans. It is usually men. So one of the things that I did was I said, we need to look at leadership as it's emerging all over the world. So I did a survey of 700 executives, mid-tier to senior executives from around the world. And the distribution of the survey was, of the completed survey, was in line with the distribution of the 2,000 largest companies in the world. So if 10% of the largest companies in the world came from a certain part of the world, 10% of the 700 came from that part of the world. So there was this survey on what was happening and what they were seeing and what they were doing. And what I did was I then went and interviewed a whole bunch of CXOs, again, from around the world. And yes, it was a balanced sample as much as I could make it of men and women. And I asked them this. I said, look, I don't want to talk to you about how you got to the level you did. That's completely uninteresting because most of that, the basis for you getting to the position that you are in, happened in the pre-digital world. What I want to hear from you is today, if you look at a mid-tier person or a junior person and you say, that person has potential, we should keep an eye on that person. What are you looking for? What are you looking for in terms of the people whom you think will be future leaders? Because what you're doing is implicitly, you're assuming a digital world. And that is much more relevant information. So every meeting, every interview started with that sort of a conversation, okay? And the final thing is there is a lot of research in medicine, in music, in physics that we don't tend to bring into business schools. We don't tend to bring into our understanding of leadership and how the human brain works and how we relate to people. We bring in ideas from psychology and sociology, but we don't generally bring in ideas from other areas. So that was also the fourth pillar of the book. So there's an enormous amount of research. That's why it is published by University Press. And that's why Sloan Management Review, which is, of course, one of the top journals respected by executives around the world, sponsored it for their series, Management at the Cutting Edge, on the cutting edge.
Amazing. So a lot of research to challenge basically the traditional view of leadership, and now it's changing. So then going to mainly the theme of today, what makes a good leader in the digital age then, if not in the past traditional view of it?
Okay. So I mentioned earlier that the idea of teams is only around 30 years old outside Japan. Okay. So why did teams come about? Around the 1980s, why did teams come about in the US? And why did they come about in Japan much earlier? Well, it's because the Japanese started using the tools of a technology, quality management, and they realized that you couldn't do it by focusing on the performance of an individual. You had to think in terms of teams because most of the tools of quality cannot be used unless you're working in teams. Aha, so we need teams. But then the role of the manager, they also realized had to change. They realized the manager had to be a coach. The manager had to clear the roadblocks instead of giving orders. Because if you're going to use teams and you're going to empower them, you are now going to have to change the role of a manager. Jump forward. Here we are at the beginning of the digital age. We are changing, profoundly changing how we work. So what we are doing, for example, and we'll come back to this if you wish a little later, but what we are doing is for the first time in human history, we are distributing people across time and across geography. The most important person for you is someone halfway across the world who is helping you create something that doesn't exist. So what does it mean for leadership? One, you have to be creative. In the 20th century, no one had to be creative in order to become a CEO. In the 21st century, most of the CEOs that the audience probably respects have created something. Not just built an organization, but have actually created something. Think of that. What a huge change that is. Second, you have to be far more collaborative than you ever were before. It's really easy to sit in a room with other people and say, guys, we need to collaborate. If we don't collaborate, we're dead. It's much, 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 much harder when you're trying to collaborate with people who don't look like you, who don't eat the same foods, who don't speak the same language, who don't worship the same gods. And that's what we are doing. Okay? You have got to take collaboration to a level that we have never had to in the past. And finally, by virtue of the same underlying issues of technology, you have to be far more inclusive. You're dealing with people across the world. They are mission critical. They are not people that you can actually ignore. And by the way, another thing that digital technologies do, they make work far more thought-driven than muscle-powered. Every prior technology amplified the power of muscle. Now you're turning and you're saying, hey, what matters is what's in your head. Now think of this profound change that little thing does. Okay? For the first time in human history in large parts of the world, and there have been exceptions in the world, by the way, so let's not worry about that. In large parts of the world, men used to dominate in places of business because they were stronger on the average. On the average, not individuals. Okay? For the first time in human history, the fact that they are stronger on the average does not matter. And suddenly the playing field is becoming level in terms of what is needed to succeed. I'm not saying the playing field is level in terms of what society expects or salaries paid and all those things, and we can talk about that if you wish. But from the point of view of what a man and a woman can contribute, the playing field is suddenly level for the first time in human history. So put these two things together. You're dealing with people around the world. You're dealing with both genders. You have to be much more inclusive. Creative, collaborative, inclusive. You didn't have to do any of those three things in the depth that you're having to do today in the years past.
Interesting. So 3 elements to becoming a good leader in the digital age. But as you know, many leaders that are basically navigating this digital world now, what leaders have so many things on their mind. What are some of the priorities? How do they prioritize helping their team or guiding the organization, let's say in the short term, medium term, long term? What are the steps that they should do to guide this?
Yeah. So making change is hard. Making change is really, really, really hard. And let me tell you what doesn't work. Let's talk about that first, and then I'll talk about how do you set priorities. You will often come across articles, particularly on the internet, 5 things that you must do if you're running a global team. 5 things you must do if you're doing X. Those things don't work. They don't work because fundamentally what happens is we are asking you to change your mindset. Just like in the 1980s and early 90s, the managers, my peers, okay, were being asked to change their mindset about what leadership means. That's the mindset we are asking you to change. So that's really hard to do. You can't do it by saying, let's follow these 5 things. And you can't do everything all at once. Okay? So what I recommend that you do is start with where you are. Look at your environment. Are you leading a global team? Are you a member of a global team? That will define the elements of behavior that you need to change, the mindsets you need to change. Are you leading people who need to be creative? That will define what you need to do. So in the book, I actually don't tell you that this is what you must do first. What I do is to say, hey, look at where you are. You have to be more inclusive. You have to be more collaborative. You have to be more creative. But look at where you are and then set priorities. Decide what is non-negotiable. What must I change now? Okay. And make sure there are very few things on that list. What is non-negotiable? Then ask, what is critically important, but it's not non-negotiable? That's stuff that you must change in the medium term. And what are things that I must do, but it doesn't have to happen now. I don't need it right now for what I'm doing in my life. And you put those in the long term. But here's the trick. You will never get to those long-term things unless you actually also ask, under what conditions will these long-term things become priorities? So I don't tell you what you have to do. I tell you, give you a methodology for you to actually say, this is what is important to me in my life at this point in time. And this is where I need to focus making changes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like leaders have to look at their own companies or organization and determine with the people that they work with or with other leadership, what's exactly important and what is not important right now to get, and then what are their steps to get there.
Yeah.
But they determine it on their own. Not all organizations are.
Yeah. Everybody's not the same. So.
Okay. Great. Amit, would you be able to tell us any major companies that are actually changing in what they look for in a leader? And if there are, what kind of companies are examples you can give?
So you find examples all over the world, okay? And you remember when I started off by saying I started noticing a subtle shift in what senior executives were talking about. So here's the thing to understand. Senior executives, first of all, they don't let theory, as I said earlier, stop them from doing what they wanted, making the changes they believe they need to make. On the other hand, senior executives also don't go about and saying, we need a new way of looking at leadership. We need to become collaborative and creative and inclusive. Okay? They solve problems for their organizations. They focus on, here is the problem in my organization that I need to solve. So look at IBM, for example. So IBM has just gone through a CEO change. Okay? And much of the last 10 years was led by Ginni Rometty. And prior to that was Sam Palmisano. So when Sam Palmisano took over, IBM was already beginning to transition out of, in terms of where its revenues came from and where its people were based, from outside the North American fortress, if you will. Okay? And at that point in time, they went through a fundamental change in how they thought about leaders and people. And it was just a beautifully crafted one single line. They went on from saying, everybody is the same, and so we'll exclude differences amongst people. to people are different and we need to learn from the differences amongst them. Everybody's the same, so we're going to ignore the differences among people. The people are different, and we actually need to understand the differences and see what we can learn from them. What a profound change. And when it was released under and flourished under Sam Palmisano, he actually went out and gave speeches and wrote articles in Foreign Affairs saying, we are no longer a multinational company. We are a globally integrated enterprise. We exist everywhere, and we have to take into account the needs of people elsewhere. So Daimler has started a program, it started in 2015, called Leadership 2020. And in their case, their board basically said, look, our German style of leadership isn't working. Okay, we are a far more diverse company now. And what they did was they created 8 teams around the world. And they said, go design a car. But your car is leadership. And we're going to call that Leadership 2020. So you can actually Google Leadership 2020 and you will find any number of things that those guys are working on. And so what the idea was that these 8 teams spread around the world, they were going to come up with, what does leadership mean for Daimler in this particular age, in this part of the world? And that was going to be rolled into changing the standards of leadership. I was asked by Daimler to come and talk to those teams as they were beginning that effort. So you see these differences all coming out all over. In 2010, IBM did a survey of CEOs. Number one thing the CEOs asked for, they were asked, so what do you look for in a leader? Number one reason, creativity. Well, marked a small little change point. For the first time ever, somebody said, creativity is the number one thing I look for in a leader. Now, actually making creativity the number one priority is really hard. It takes time. But that shift is beginning to happen. And each company is beginning to make the shift in a different place. But they are all beginning to move towards the same direction. 2014, 2015, if you go back and look and search, you will find reports that about 1/3 of American companies were changing how they were evaluating performance. Because what worked beautifully in the 20th century was failing miserably in this new world. So they started changing that. So every company looks at it differently and approaches it differently, but they're all struggling with the issue of how do we redefine leadership for the digital age? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds so very good. And I have a question on, I'm sure a lot of our attendees are coming on today for this specific question. What are the key things that we, our future leaders, can make ourselves better, like as a leader? What are the actions that we can take?
Okay. It is not that hard, and it is very hard. Okay, so let me give you a few things that you can start doing right now. Number one, change your language of leadership. And what do I mean by that? When we think of leaders, we think from a cultural context. In North America, leaders are decisive. Well, in Southeast Asia, where I lived for 2 years recently, living in Singapore, because I thought I had sort of lost my Asian roots. So one of the reasons I went back to Asia to live in Asia and teach in Asia. And in Southeast Asia, leaders are not necessarily decisive, but they are effective. They are equally effective. But when you say decisive, a leader must be decisive, you're excluding a lot of people who are not decisive, but who are very effective leaders. Change your language of leadership. We all do it in different parts of the world. We have words that we use to describe leaders, and they apply only to our own cultures. Simple thing to change. Next thing that you can do is take risks. You can't lead for creativity if you have never been creative yourself. Why should anybody believe you if you are always looking, you must do it my way? This is the only right way to do it. If you have that sort of mindset, you are not creative. You're not going to let anybody else be creative. You will simply not be able to lead for creativity. Okay? So look at yourself. What do you need to change? How will you open up to be more open to people? Make your team safe. Here's something, again, Shirley, you will remember this from the class, right? We spent so much time dealing with this issue. How many, and I asked you and I ask everybody, the saying, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions.
Yes.
Okay? We talked about this, right? Don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. It's a buzzword. We say it all the time. But think of what you're actually saying. You're saying, don't come to me, because the solution may not be something that this person can actually come up with. You want them to collaborate. You don't want them to tell you of their problems. How can you collaborate? How can you lead a team which needs to collaborate? Okay, watch what you're saying. Watch how you get people to collaborate. What is important? These are simple changes that we can do without turning to our companies and saying, what standards of leadership do you want to hold me to? Because you know what? When they do make those changes, you'll come out ahead. So start making them. Okay? And we could go on, but that should give you a start.
No, that's amazing. And at Hult, at least from a student perspective, the diversity of the school really brings the collaboration out too. So I'm really glad to hear that's like a key skills that our school is training us to do. I have the last question, which I think most people here have already started asking, is what do you think for your book, taking on this adding significance to our current climate? And I think a lot of people are wondering about more the COVID-19 pandemic in this situation. How does it apply?
So think about it this way, okay? We have a crisis in our hand. Crisis leaders need to be strong. They need to be directive, super directive. Well, think about that. Can you really be super directive? Do you actually have access to all the information that you need in a very, very complex world? Think about it another way. We have a problem with ventilators. We have a problem with ventilators in the US. We have a problem with ventilators in Europe. We have a problem. We need more ventilators than we actually have. How do you solve that problem? One way you can go and say, oh my God, these are the ventilators we are using in our hospitals. That's what we need. Well, in America, the typical ventilator is somewhere between $5,000 and $50,000. I can guarantee you one thing. If that's the only ventilator which is going to help with the COVID-19 pandemic, this pandemic is not going to go away because most countries in the world will not be able to afford a $5,000 or a $50,000 ventilator. We do need ventilators, but we need something else which a whole bunch of places can use. What's that? That's about creativity. In 2010, 2 MIT students came up with a $100 ventilator. Does it do everything that one in a hospital does? Absolutely not. But does it do a specific thing well? Yes, it does. If we had $100 ventilators, could we beat this problem around the world? Oh, yes, we could. Creativity. Don't jump to the most immediate solution. Okay? Be creative, be collaborative. You will never know enough yourself. So, whom will you partner with? How will you distribute leadership? How will you coordinate leadership instead of being an authoritarian? We live in a far more complex world. So, these ideas are absolutely critical to the situation we are in, because you know what? The pandemic is just one version of this complicated world we have started creating. Okay.
Awesome. Sounds like everything is very tailored, and during the COVID-19, as you were saying, problem-solving skills specific for that organization, using your creativity and the resources you have is key then.
Okay.
So thank you, Professor Amit. I will look through the Q&A for what the attendees have posted. Hello, is this presentation going to be shared? Our recordings, I believe, will be shared on the same link that you have entered. Here's a good one. Okay, here's a good one. Besides psychology and sociology, what are other disciplines we should look at?
Let me give an answer that you would probably not think about. I don't want you to look at disciplines. One of the executives, senior executives that I quoted in the book, said, he had this wonderful expression. And he said, Amit, you know what? We have a lot of experts. Okay. For leaders, we need people who can navigate the in-between spaces that experts avoid. When we start thinking in terms of disciplines in today's world, we are trying to build deep expertise. And you know what? If I need a brain surgery, I want someone with deep expertise in neuroscience to operate on me. But when I'm looking for a leader today, I need people with breadth of knowledge, people who can integrate knowledge. And that, by the way, does not mean that you disrespect experts. That does mean that you are humble enough to learn from experts very, very quickly. What do I need to know? We need people with breadth, not so much with depth. So start thinking in a multidisciplinary way rather than what a disciplinary way. One just last thought about that. In 2012, 2013, 2014, somewhere in that range, a group of two very senior executives, including the president of one of the major executive search firms of the world, Heidrick & Struggles, and a professor at the Harvard Business School wrote an HBR article. And what they said in that article, which was just absolutely amazing, was senior executives have more in common with each other than with the people in their disciplines. Think of it. Senior executives have more in common with each other than with the people in their disciplines. What they found from the search processes that they were leading for senior executives, exactly what I'm telling you. Depth in any one field is less important for a leader. I'm not discounting depth of knowledge, but for a leader, it is less important than being able to navigate those in-between spaces. So if you have deep knowledge in an area, instead of making it deeper, start broadening out. It will help you be a better leader than otherwise.
Great. So for the next question, traditional leadership skills versus leadership skills in the digital age, how do you see that it will impact various industry verticals? What key industry verticals will be high in demand after the COVID-19 situation?
I am not sure that, the basic industries, quote unquote, and we could go down the path of what is an industry anyway, anymore, um, will profoundly change because of COVID-19. I think what you need to understand from what is happening with the COVID-19 is how interconnected we are across industries, across countries, across companies. You know what so the basic industry structure will simply continue it may be on pause right now. It has been evolving for a while, and that evolution is going to continue. So COVID-19 itself is not going to have an impact on it. By the way, just if you don't believe me, you should go back and look up a couple of things. For decades, America used to have something called the SIC, statistical index codes, by which it used to group industries. And in the late 90s, they had to change the SIC because the industries were changing so rapidly that the SIC did not capture all the industries that were being created. Similarly, the European Union used to collect data on industries with a fairly rigid system, and they went to version 2 somewhere near 2005. So industries have been evolving for a while, and they'll continue to evolve. It's a long-term issue. COVID-19 is not going to have an impact on that specific issue.
This question from Monique. In your investigation, how did you see bias regarding gender, race, and others when the leaders were evaluating people with potential for leading?
Thank you. That's a really great question. That's a really great question because we do a really lousy job about bias. We are far from solving all the problems of bias that are coming, that we face in the world. And you find some leaders who are actually, and some companies which are actually making a difference. And you see them in different parts of the world. I gave you the IBM example. I told you about Daimler. Unilever has a system where what they're trying to do is they're trying to educate managers from one part of the world, and they're putting them in groups with managers from other parts of the world to learn from each other about how they manage differently. They're equally effective, but they are not the same. Too few companies are doing that. And one thing that does give me hope, a lot of hope, for change in the very near future. So in 2015, Mark Benioff, who is the CEO of Salesforce, he did something amazing. He pretty much went on a media tour and he said, when I started my company, I was wrong. I did not, I'm putting words in his mouth, he didn't say the exact words. I did not pay enough attention to being inclusive. And today, I realize how it is adversely affecting us. So he put into place amazing policies, which, and I hope other companies take it up. With respect to women, for example, he found there was a difference in pay levels for people doing the same job. Only difference, their gender. So he equalized them. In 1 year, their payroll went up 6% or something like that. You can look it up. I don't remember the exact details. He also mandated policies like you cannot have an internal meeting unless there are 30% of the people in the room are women. Think about that. You can actually give people women titles and keep them out of positions of power, not by inviting them to the right meetings. He went after that problem. So there are people, senior leaders in different places who are actually doing stuff like this. And there's a lot to learn from. There's also a lot to learn from something else that you may not think will have a huge impact on leadership, but I think is having. Women and minorities in whichever part of the world, they are making their voices heard. They're making their voices heard. They're going out and saying, we exist, you cannot ignore us. So a few years back, when there was this crisis at Google, where one of the engineers published a quote unquote manifesto, which became public, in which he said, women can't code. And the fact that we are letting women code is keeping me from becoming a senior engineer in this company. Okay, and that led to a whole bunch of protests around the world. And two women came out and said, you know what, guys? We're going to have a walkout. And there was a walkout on a specific day in all Google facilities around the world. Now, did it achieve all of its ends? No. But did it send a message that women and many, 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 many men believe that we are long past the time when we need to start thinking in terms of equality? Absolutely. So it's happening at the top. It is also happening because younger people particularly are passionate about these issues.
Great. A question from Tamara from Ecuador. I would like to ask how to be a great leader under critical economic circumstances with unemployment, not earnings, and bankrupt companies.
So I don't know Ecuador. I don't know the challenges that you live under. So any answer that I give you might seem very naive. With that acknowledged, I think what people need to do in much more often than they do is to look to themselves and other groups of people like themselves for solutions. Don't expect the solutions to come from an authoritarian company in the middle of a crisis. Okay? If that authoritarian company in the middle of a crisis is not going to meet your needs, do consider if you can partner up with others who think like you to do something different, to start your own little business. You'll probably be happier then. Okay. Will it be hard? Absolutely, it'll be hard. Will you face challenges, and including challenges of the system fighting you? Absolutely, you will face that. But you know what? If you don't do that, all you will end up doing is you'll end up at best, if you're on this call, at best you'll end up being a middle manager in some soul-sucking organization. Okay? If your odds are becoming a middle manager in a soul-sucking organization and doing something on your own, I know what decision I would make. Okay? Now, all organizations are not soul-sucking. We tend to be very, very critical. And there are great organizations and there are lousy ones. Okay? The great ones are trying to make the changes. The lousy ones, it's existential. They'll go out of business. They will go out of business sooner or later. Okay.
Great. Next question in our Q&A. How does the increased exercise of AI will affect business in leadership and in teamwork?
Yeah, that's a really great question. That's a really great question because we don't think of leadership and AI in the same breath. So here's how I think about it. Here's what I wrote about in my book. First of all, so everything that I've written about in the book about leadership is tied to technology, because, otherwise we're just saying, we're taking old ideas about leadership and we're saying, how do we apply it, force fit into the leadership, those ideas into the digital age. So I've always gone back to what is the digital world doing, and therefore what does it mean for leadership? So if you look at technology, there are five assumptions, not mistakes, pardon me, five assumptions that leaders make about technology, digital technologies. The first one is it is benevolent, that it always does good. The second one is it's infallible, it is never wrong. The third one is it's controllable. What we want it to do, it will do, and nothing more and nothing less. The fourth one is it is omniscient, which means it gives us the power over our environment, complete power over our environment. And the fifth assumption they make is of authenticity, that what a digital technology does, like AI, and what a human being does is the same. Now, these five assumptions, which are universally made, are often, not always, but often not true. I want to just talk about the last one because it has relevance for the AI issue. We know from research that if you create a drawing, for example, and let's say assume it's a nice drawing, and you show people that drawing and you say it is made by a human being, they will go, wow. But if you show the same drawing and you tell them that it was created by artificial intelligence, they're not going to be impressed. They will say, it was created by a machine. Okay? In our minds, we think about technologies differently. And here's the problem that we need to wrestle with. Kate Darling, who is a PhD scientist at the Media Lab, and she studies AI, robots, and ethics. She has this wonderful experiment. There is a YouTube video on it where she created a really cuddly animal, a dinosaur, which was really a robot. And she distributed it to a bunch of people to play with. And they played with it for an hour. And then she said, kill it, destroy it. And not one person would destroy something that they knew was a machine. They knew it was a machine, but they still wouldn't destroy it because they had played with it. Now flip the situation around. Would a machine, artificial intelligence, make the same decision under the same circumstances? Arguably not. But this is what we are doing. We are creating organizations where we are bringing in AI, and we should. I'm not against technology. I've created technologies before I returned to academia. I've actually created technologies, but we are bringing in technologies without understanding how we as human beings will interact with these technologies. A couple of years back, a Finnish company made the news all over the world. Why? They had appointed AI, an AI engine, to a formal position on the management team of the company. Go look it up. Okay? Because it'll improve the quality of our analysis, of the decisions we make in analysis. Well, yeah. How about creativity? Will it improve your creativity? These are issues that we need to wrestle with when we think in terms of how AI and leadership will work together.
Okay. I think we're almost out of time. Lizanne, how should I just take one more or two more?
I think one more question and then we'll finish up.
Okay. There's a lot of questions. I have to pick one now. So I had one that I saw that was very good. Okay, this is from Rishabh. How do you think the current scenario, which is COVID-19, going to shape the usage of digital tools in the field of management?
We will start turning, in all likelihood, to AI for solutions of complex problems much more soon. And I think, sadly, we will make a bunch of different mistakes because we will make those assumptions that I mentioned, that it's beneficial, it is infallible, it is controllable, it is omniscient, and it is authentic. It will be seductive to go out and use the power of AI without thinking about these 5 assumptions that we will make. Okay? And I think we need to pause and do it thoughtfully. We absolutely need to bring in AI, but ask under what conditions will it be beneficial? What types of errors will it make? It's not infallible. Okay? There are people sitting in jails in America with 30 years added to their jail sentence because of the color of their skin, because of a decision made by an AI engine that was used to guide sentencing. They are not infallible. They are not completely controllable. And we need to think about those issues. But it is coming. It is coming sooner than we think it will.
Very good. Thank you very much, Professor Amit.
So somebody had asked about what the heck is the name of the book in one of the quiz things. Can I just hold it up?
Yes, you do.
Okay. So,
the digital world.
Leading in the digital world. Guys, it was actually sold out on Amazon a couple of weeks back, and because of the COVID-19 situation, and I know MIT Press has been working very hard to restock wherever it's getting sold out. So please be patient. If you want to get it, please be patient. MIT Press will certainly get it out to you. And one thing they did ask me to say that right now they are, MIT Press every spring, they have a sale if you buy directly from MIT Press from their website. And they have decided to include this book on their list of books that they are offering for sale. So if you go to mitpress.mit.edu and buy it from there up to the 30th of this month, it will be about 35% off. And they will, of course, guarantee that they can deliver as opposed to somebody else who might not be able to. Okay.
Fantastic.
Popular book.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Amit and Shirley. That was really great, and thank you everybody for joining. As we said before, a recording of this will be sent to you in the next coming days with a link. And like Amit said, please check out the mitpress.mit.edu to avail of the 35% sale. And if you'd like any more information on our courses, please make sure to visit hult.edu. And if you think it was useful, this webinar, we have a number of other webinars coming up, the next being next Friday with Professor Robert Hamway, and he'll be discussing the art of delivery. So, and you can register for these on hult.edu/virtual skills. So that's all from us today. Thank you so much, Amit and Shirley. That was really great. I really enjoyed it. And thank you everybody for joining. We hope to see you soon.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.